And that time is now. Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, panelists, good evening. My name is Greg Sukiennik. I'm the Vermont Managing Editor for New England Newspapers. And it is my honor to welcome all of you to this forum discussion on school safety, gun violence, and solutions for our community and our state. First, I'd like to take the time to thank and welcome the panelists who have graciously given their time to be with us this evening. It's a sunny Friday evening. We haven't had many of those, so thank you for taking the time. We have Brian Patno, who's a CMA at Josephson Pediatrics. Next to him, we have Captain Mark Carignan of the Brattleboro Police Department. Next to him, Lieutenant Anthony French, Commander of the Westminster Barracks of the Vermont State Police. Next to him, I realize I'm going left to right instead of left to right here. Josephson, the Chief Executive Officer of the Brattleboro Retreat. Over here, we have Steve Perrin, Principal at Brattleboro Union High School. Mr. Perrin, thank you for welcoming us to your building. William Anton, the Principal of Superintendent of the Wyndham Central Supervisory Union. Next to him is the Principal, Bob Thibault, Principal at Leland High School. And Lyle Holliday, Superintendent of the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union. Now, about 5 or 6 weeks ago, when a young man from Pulteney was arrested for allegedly planning to commit a mass shooting at Fairhaven High School, not more than a week after the Parkland shooting, our Governor, Phil Scott, was moved to call for action. He said that we needed to review school security and safety procedures, look at the way we provide mental health services, and examine our gun laws. He said it would be a difficult conversation, but one that we needed to have. And we thought it was important for communities such as ours that we serve to start the conversation here, locally, and promote a productive dialogue that respects differences and seeks common sense solutions. With your help, we're going to try to start that conversation tonight. So, we are somewhat limited in microphone power, so we do have to have some rules, and here are the rules. So we are going to take questions only by comment card, because we have just the 2 microphones and we're sharing among 8 people, and myself. To ask a question of the panel, raise your hand, raise the card that Samantha or Kevin have given you. Here's Samantha Wood. She's a managing editor in New England Newspapers, one of my colleagues. Raise your hand and she will come to you. We'll ask those questions as they come in, or we'll save them for a Q&A session at the end of the discussion. We will not be doing questions by microphone, but we hope that if we finish early, that you'll have the time to talk to the panelists directly afterwards. Now, much like the game show Jeopardy, please make sure that they are in the form of a question to the panel. This is not a debate. So, no one's keeping score. There's not going to be a winner or loser declared. So, this is only going to work if we respect each other. So, please resist the temptation to shout over questions, to shout out at the panelists or at each other. Because you and I know that I'm willing to bet right now there are people on opposite sides of Second Amendment issues here in this room right now. And but I hope that this can be a process where we can start to understand each other and start moving in the direction of common ground, where we can start searching for answers. And with that in mind, I turn to a favorite quote of mine from Abraham Lincoln, who said this in his first inaugural address. I will not try to imitate Abraham Lincoln. "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as they surely will be, by the better angels of our nature." So I ask everyone to try to find the better angels of their nature tonight as we start this discussion. First, I'm going to start with a couple of high school students who are here in the front row, and get a sense of, because I think it's important to start to focus on with the folks who are actually living the situation out right now, who've been through the anxiety of the last 20 years since Columbine. So we have with us, okay, I'll just sit with you guys actually, that's okay. I have here Gary May III from Leland High School, and I have Molly Durley, who is here at Brattleboro Union High School. So I'll just kind of share the microphone with the 2 of you if you mind. Just leave myself at home. Okay, let's see. I guess my first question is, what have the last 6 weeks been like for you as a high school student?
For me, since I was one of the people who organized the walkout, it's been pretty busy. The last 6 weeks have been a lot to me, collaborating with 2 other people to produce the walkout itself. And it's been really important to get our voices heard, as well as getting Lauren, yeah, sure. Chapman out here so she can register people to vote. That was really important to get young people able and educated to their right to vote in the elections, so they can voice their opinions and shape their future now. So.
Okay, Gary, you come at this from a slightly different but slightly same perspective, because I understand that you are a sportsman. Tell me a little bit about what it's like to sort of come at this issue from that perspective, as someone who's interested in these issues, but someone who also owns and uses a gun.
So the day after Parkland, I was kind of hesitant to go to school because the anxiety is still there. I watched live feeds, I watched the news for a long time to figure out what was going on at Parkland High School. So when I first got to school, I was really skittish around everybody because it's not something that you would expect to happen here, but the very next day, we had a scare in northern Vermont that somebody was planning to shoot. So it's been scary, as weird as that sounds. I'm a big guy, I don't get scared very easily, but this spooky. And coming from a gun advocate side, I never thought that I would be scared of something I enjoy so much. Yeah.
Guys, I'm just asking you both one more question. I mean, as you look at the situation, sort of from your perspective, what do you think should change in Vermont, or what changes are possible, and I mean, sort of realistically? And, I mean, obviously, it's a difficult issue, as you know. So, if you just talk about that for a minute, and who will go in first order?
Okay. So, like I stated before, I use guns, I work on guns, I hunt every year in November. While I was here at Brattleboro, I made a 20-page business plan on how I was going to run my own gun shop. So, I love them. With my grandfather, I've been through the process of buying a gun. So I come from the point of knowing how to purchase a gun, where some people who argue do not know that. And even though I'm an advocate for guns, I still think that maybe more action needs to be taken. I don't think that a small background check and 4 papers with your signature on it is enough. So far, I've broken it down in my own mind, my own personal opinion, that maybe it's not the gun's problem, maybe it's the access to the guns, because we can't be trusted with them. Granted, I still love them, I don't want them taken away, but maybe 18 is too young to purchase a gun, even though the high school students couldn't purchase the gun. Well, in Parkland they could, because the kid was 19. But maybe 21, or being 21 to buy a gun isn't such a bad idea. I know at 17, my mind state when I was 15 is a lot different. I've grown, so we're still developing as humans at the point. So maybe looking and considering the age of purchasing a gun to be 21 isn't that bad. Yeah, because I grew up thinking that when I was 18, I was going to buy my first AR. And maybe at 18, I'm not responsible enough to do that. As far as high-capacity mags go, I've done a research project on this about the assault weapon ban that Bill Clinton did. And in Columbine, there was no high-capacity mags, just a lot of 10-round mag switching. So sure, it can make it easier, but I don't feel like that's a step in the right direction. As far as bump stock goes, I know that was slathered around. It's going to be hard to ban those in one state when slide fire is based out of another state selling to the entire country. And that's my opinion.
Thanks. I think that's really valuable having someone who actually knows guns backwards and forwards to talk about that. Thank you very much, Gary. Molly, your own thoughts on that time?
I think it's really important to educate our youth on the right to vote and gun control issues, as well as the legislation that's going through Vermont right now. I don't know the exact numbers, I probably should because I've said them like 50 times, but the bill that are being passed right now is really important, I think, to update our background checks, to remove bump stocks from being available to use, because personally I don't think you need that because they simulate fire of an automatic weapon, which I just think is unnecessary. And the two others about taking away a firearm for up to 60 days in a household if you commit domestic violence. And I think that's really important because it's been proven that in a household that with somebody who commits domestic violence, and if they have a firearm in the household, then I think it's really important that the police can take that away because it's been proven that it will escalate to the use of that firearm and preventing shootings in Parkland. I think the age limit should be raised to at least 21, if not more. Because again, I don't think we've really developed as humans at 18. Yeah. So.
Thank you very much for having the for doing that for me. I really appreciate it. All right, well, let's move on. While we're talking about youth issues, much from someone from a pediatrician background, Mr. Patno. If we could talk a little bit about the stress that young people are facing with these shootings and the media coverage of them and the lockdown drills and things that they're going through as a result of our efforts to try to keep them safe and prepare for what we hope never happens. Please.
Thank you. Well, I mean, kids these days have so much stress in their life. I believe because of social media and things like that, everything's instant. We are, as a pediatrician's office, we are the first, kind of like the first part of defense for kids when they come in. We see kids, that are depressed. We see kids with a lot of anxiety. We see kids that are bullied and stuff like that. And anecdotally, it seems to be getting worse. I don't have the numbers, but it does seem to be more common. That's what we're getting appointments for kids. And like I said, we're kind of at the beginning. They come to the pediatrician. We talk to them about it. Part of my role is to talk to these kids and work with the families to get them moved on to other organizations, other help, whether it be mental health workers, social workers, psychiatrists. But there definitely is a sense of urgency in the field. Part of my background comes as being on an ambulance for 23 years and Perrin for 13 years. And so my background and my discussion here is about prevention. Preventing, whether it be self-inflicted, whether it be people shouldn't do all about it. But that's where I come from. And I do believe in prevention. I do believe in keeping guns locked and safe for kids. I don't think I can really talk about the drills that go on in school. I'm sure there's more qualified people to talk about that, but I definitely do see influx of kids with anxiety, whether it be from the shooting or just being a kid in general. I'm not sure.
Thank you. One follow-up question. Do you find that young people are having more difficulty dealing with anger these days?
I think it all goes with the anxiety and the depression and that sort of thing. I'm not sure if the anger part is any more than it has been in the past, but there's definitely a lot more stress on the kids right now, and they need an outlet, and that's what we're trying to provide.
Thank you. Okay, let's go down the table to Mr. Josephson from the Brattleboro retreat. You can have this microphone on this to let me. I'll leave it at that, really. Mr. Josephson, when there are acts of violence, we hear a lot about mental health and mental illness, and there are a lot of misconceptions out there about the difference between the two and about the relationship between mental health and acts of violence. We could talk about sort of some of those differences and help us with sort of clear up some misconceptions that are out there.
Sure. There is a lot of talk right now about mental health. So every time there's a shooting in this country, inevitably a politician seems to say we have a mental health issue. So I do want to clarify, as a professional who's been in the field 30 years, worked a lot with kids, what we mean by that. So mental health. Everyone's got mental health. You have mental health, I have mental health to different degrees. Not all of us have a mental illness. So to have a diagnosable mental illness means you have to have certain behaviors or emotional states that are really impacting your ability to function. So when we say we have a mental health problem, it really doesn't mean anything. And I just want to be really clear about that. I think when you look at the profile of a lot of individuals who have committed some of these crimes and shootings, it's not always true, even in retrospect, that we can say they have a clear diagnosable mental illness. We do have people who have very maladaptive coping skills for a whole host of reasons. So we may know people in our lives who, if we were under stress and struggling with something, we talk it out, right? But there's many people that I've worked with over the years, kids, especially when I work with kids, who would be the kind of referrals I would get from a school because Johnny's punching and very aggressive with other kids in the classroom. And when I work with them as a clinician, what I find out from Johnny is what he learned at home was the way he solved problems is to punch somebody. And that's maybe what his role model was. And so, does Johnny have a mental illness, or does Johnny have a maladaptive coping behavior? And then you take somebody like Johnny who's learned to punch as a way to solve problems, and he's isolated at school, and he feels bullied at school, and maybe he doesn't come from the nice part of town, and he feels less than others at school, and he's angry, and there's lots of things that can feed the mentality of somebody who feels really angry and blames other people. There's a lot of things that can go into that, but he may not have a mental illness. And so I also want to just be clear, as someone who's done a lot of crisis mental health work, that if a child like that, or an adolescent or a youth came to me and had feelings, was angry, had struggled with these type of bad coping behaviors, if I was asked to assess them for dangerousness, we should know that in our society, in Vermont, we have very special laws as well. We cannot involuntarily psychiatrically hospitalize someone unless we can prove and show that they are absolutely a danger to themselves or others. And so that is a very tricky thing. It takes a lot of clinical savvy to kind of get at that essence. But it really is, as I was talking to some of our police officers before, that it's really tricky. So I could assess somebody today, right now, at 6:20, and really feel like they're not a danger to themselves or others, but they leave this room and they get a call from their boyfriend or girlfriend that they're breaking up with them, and they find out some bad news at home, and maybe they use some substance on the way to the park, and an hour later their mental status, how they're feeling and doing, is not the same as when I interviewed them at 6:20. And I don't have, and the mental health system doesn't have sort of a crystal ball to predict that these things are going to happen and change somebody's mental status.
Do you think that needs to change as far as state law with regards to involuntary commitment?
I think there's really important human rights, basic rights that we need to respect. What worries me and what I hear from parents in my career is the following. And this is more for parents and families who are struggling with someone who does have a known mental illness. So I hear all the time from family members and perhaps officers too as well, our son struggles and has a mental illness, and we see he's getting worse, and we want him to be in the hospital, and he doesn't agree and doesn't see that he needs treatment. Can't you put him in the hospital now, because we can tell you in a week it's going to be terrible. And the answer is, I cannot use that information. I can only go on what that person presents to me at that time. And so he may look very much worse in a week, and then maybe we qualify for involuntary hospitalization. But even though the parents know the person really, really well, I can't act on that until it gets to a certain point.
Sure. Gentlemen, to your left there, is there an aspect of that you want to comment on in terms of commitment for folks that might or might not be need to be in a hospital class setting?
Well, as far as the state police goes, I will kind of comment on mental health in general. So we recognize that in the past, law enforcement in mental health situations, it really isn't the best way to address somebody in a mental health crisis. So as far as the state police go, the Westminster Barracks just recently received funding through the HCRS for a in-house mental health clinician as a police liaison. So we currently have a woman that just started a couple weeks ago that's able to work out of the barracks to respond to calls with us. We cover a large area, a very remote area, which happens to, we end up with a lot of folks that are unable to access services as easily as some people that may live in a more populated town. So this way we can provide immediately when the crisis is happening, have this worker go with us, either in a cruiser or in their own vehicle to respond and address the situation as it's happening, so we can better help the person in crisis. So we recognize that we are not going to solve the problem, but as a team approach, we can solve the problem, hopefully get the person some resources that they may need to help them and to help them in the future, to help get them pointed in the right direction anyways.
Okay. Juggling questions are coming in, the questions I have in front of me. So, try to ask Mr. Josephson a little more questions and try to get some of these. Mr. Josephson, we hear, what would you say is the most pressing mental health issue in the state? I'm asking that because I'm aware that there's a national shortage of psychiatric professionals and that shortage is keenly felt here in Vermont.
I would agree with that. That is one of our pressing issues. I would also agree with the doctor that our kids and families are more stressed out than ever for a lot of different reasons. And so what I do know is the best thing we can do as a community, as a state, is to have access to mental health services for kids and families when they're ready to access them, when schools make referrals and say we're worried about the student. Not having timely access is, I think, our biggest problem. And so HCRS, our local designated agency, Community Mental Health Center, struggles to be able to keep up with the demand. We do at points as well. And so just like with any problem, you wouldn't want to wait to see your primary care physician till next week, right? So you want to be able to have that access, and it's been a struggle here in Vermont.
Okay, I do have one direct question for you that just came in my cart. And it is, will you actually agree or disagree with the Vermont law needs to change? I guess that with regards to, I think this is with regards to psychiatric holds for 24 hours.
Yes, and so again, we used to have a law, this predates me and I'm a relative newcomer to Vermont, but we used to have a law when we could have someone at the retreat and they wanted to be discharged and they weren't being held involuntarily, and there was a 4-day rule where we could say, we're really concerned about you, and I know you say you want to go home, but here's the reasons why we think we want to stay and observe you for a couple more days. And that rule is no longer in place, and I know our doctors would really appreciate, again, we're not trying to abuse people's rights, we're not trying to keep people in treatment unnecessarily, we have no incentive to do that whatsoever, but when we have concerns, it's great to have more flexibility.
Thank you. This might be a question for the two police officers to your left. This question asks, more young people are being arrested for domestic violence. I guess that's a question, are more young people being arrested for domestic violence, and if so, why?
I guess I would just ask to clarify whether young people, young adults, or juveniles?
Doesn't say.
Okay, young adults. I have not seen a trend where young people are being arrested for domestic abuse or committing domestic abuse that we're aware of at greater rates than in the past. I have not seen that trend. Lieutenant, I don't know if you feel different.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any statistics that would show that, so I'm not positive.
Okay.
If I could just make one.
Oh, sure, please do. I'm sorry, we're going to be in your direction next, so go ahead.
Sure. Regarding what Dr. Josephson was speaking about, Lieutenant French spoke about the sort of the temporary holds. There are some tools that I think would be beneficial to police, and that might increase public safety from a legislative perspective that don't currently exist. And the temporary holds are part of it. So I can explain how what Dr. Josephson explained actually plays out in a boots on the ground way on the street. So I can tell you a real world actual story where someone, police officers, sadly this isn't all that unusual, police officers might respond to someone's home, family member says, hey, this person is threatening to injure themselves, they have a gun, and I'm really worried they're going to hurt themselves. So the police will arrive and take custody of the firearm, speak to the person, they might go to the hospital to be evaluated, and there are some circumstances where they will be involuntarily sent to a mental health hospital to be evaluated for a period of time, I think it's 72 hours, I think 3 days they can be evaluated. We take custody of that gun under an exception of just sort of exigency, right? We're not going to leave that gun with that person. So the person goes to retreat, we take the gun. During the course of the 3 days, they may get their medications kind of squared away, or they may receive some services, they get evaluated by mental health professionals, all of which is great. And then they're released from the facility. And they will come to the police department and say, can I have my gun back now? And we give it back, because there's no function, there's no legal way that we can deprive that person of their property. And then this particular person, 2 days later, tried to kill themselves with the firearm that we have returned to them 2 days later. So there are some holes, and they have real world implications and real world results about that. So I just wanted to add the real world story that goes along with that. What that solution is, what that legislative fix is, I don't know, but I think there are some holes.
There is kind of a follow-up question that sort of addresses that. I don't know if there's anyone here who can actually answer it. How do you address a perfectly healthy person today getting a gun who, in a moment, becomes mentally ill or presents a mental illness condition? I don't know if there's anyone here.
I'm not qualified to answer that. I don't know if anyone else is.
It's a good question. All right, Lieutenant French, if we can go to you next. Thank you very much for being here. So the governor has asked for school safety assessments throughout the state. I know those are continuing, but school safety is something that the Department of Public Safety has been working on for 20 years, the entire career, I understand. Can you tell me a little bit about what's different with these assessments than what's already in place, and how they mesh with the work that you've already done and continue to do?
So yes, the governor has asked for every school, public schools, private schools, independent schools to be assessed. We're doing those along with local police departments and sheriff's departments to make sure every school gets covered. We have worked with schools, as you said, throughout my career. I think as we've noticed, as times have changed, we've kind of changed the way we work with schools and the questions we ask. I know when I first came on, we weren't asking them if they had emergency preparedness plans, and I know we weren't doing lockdown drills. So these surveys that the governor has asked us to complete are similar to questions we've asked before. They basically go over the school's emergency preparedness procedures, how the school is currently, how their site currently addresses security needs, what they have in place, do they have plans in place, are they following the plans suggested by the state already, and what they can use for improvements going forward. So how can we help them in the future to create more secure schools, or what are they lacking? And so we're providing that feedback to the governor's office so they can have it to address needs statewide going forward. We do have troopers assigned to every school, so they can go into the schools. We've been doing this for some time. Obviously, it's important for us to have contact with children in schools, so it's always been important for law enforcement to be involved with children, because we want them to see us in a light where, we're not just showing up the first time they're meeting us for the first time on a traffic stop, or at an act of violence in their home, or a crime, some other situation. It's great where they can just see us in a casual setting that they're comfortable in, such as their school. So it's great that we get out and get involved in the schools, but when we go and have those visits with the schools, we're talking to administrators. We're noting if the door's locked when we come in the door. What's happening how are the conversations? We're asking them about emerging preparedness plans. So we've been kind of doing this stuff for a while. This is just a more formalized survey that's encompassing every school to gather that information to the governor's office.
Thank you. Captain Carey, we're going to ask you the same question about specifically your interaction with the schools here at Brattleboro.
Sure.
So in terms of directly, and then we'll bring you back here to the school administrator and principal side of the table.
Sure. So we're fortunate at Brattleboro, we actually have a pretty comprehensive school crisis plan, school safety plan, with all the elementary schools, the middle school, the high school, and have for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, for a number of years. The initiative by the governor, I think, is welcome. I think it's fantastic. It, for Brattleboro at least, duplicates, replicates a lot of stuff that we already have, but that by no means takes away from the relevance of it and the quality of it. I think it's very good that he's doing it statewide for the entire state. And if nothing else, it draws more attention to it here in Brattleboro.
Recent additions or improvements or changes that you want to talk about specifically with regards to Brattleboro? Or?
Regarding the school safety plan?
Well, yeah, sure.
I think I would probably leave that to school officials to comment.
Okay, sure.
I certainly can discuss our responses to incidents, but as far as preventative safety things, I think that I would defer to the school officials to comment.
Okay, so we're going to drop this microphone here and grab that one.
So we have met with all the outlying towns with the Vermont State Police, in town, meeting with Brattleboro Police Department, and coming in, as both the officers have said, doing safety assessments, and then meeting with the principals, with myself, to talk about, so this is what we see, and here are suggestions for ways that you could increase the safety of your building. One of the things that I learned about today, meeting with Lieutenant French, is that there are a series of tabletop activities that at a staff meeting, there's a scenario given, and everybody in the on the school staff talks about, so if this were to have happened here, what would we have done? How would we have responded? And so that's something that will start being often happening in the schools. The other thing that Lieutenant French talked with me today is that, as they just said, it's more than just coming in and doing the assessment. It's coming in and meeting with teachers to make sure that teachers have their answers, their questions answered. We need to look to the law enforcement people as the experts. We're educators. They're the experts in safety. So those are some of the things that we've started.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I have a question specifically for you, and then we'll continue over here. My name is Superintendent Holiday. It seems that one of the common threads in school shootings is that the shooter vocalized their plans ahead of time. Would you support curriculum that directly teaches students how to recognize that classmates may be a threat to safety and encourage reporting? Trusted adult.
Thank you. So,
And if so, how do you implement that?
I was reminded a while ago that right after 9/11, the phrase came out, if you see something, say something. And that needs to be forefront in all of our minds again. As parents, we need to be checking our children's social media. If we see something that is concerning to us, we need to say something. We need to tell another adult, we need to tell a law enforcement officer, a teacher, a principal, myself. If you see something, say something. We need to be in the habit of looking after ourselves. Students know they have friends that are in crisis, and though it might be a hard thing, it's really important for students to get into the habit of saying, I'm really worried about my friend. And then we can take some steps to try to find out, is there an issue? Is there something that we should be doing with that?
Thank you. Mr. Anton, if you sort of talk about the situation with at the Central Supervisory Union of your schools with working with state police and addressing building issues and overall safety issues.
Sure. I've been the superintendent now for a year and a half, and my predecessor did a really nice job of making sure that we had regular communication with all first responders, and so that it wasn't a situation where we were ever surprised if anything happened. We got to know each other, and we've really formalized that in the last couple of years. So Lieutenant French and I get together with a group of about 15 to 20 people every 6 to 8 weeks. It involves road crew, and fire department, and the state police, and sheriff, and principals. And we do exactly what Lyle just talked about. We do some tabletop exercises. We go through scenarios. We follow up on all of our emergency operation plans, so that if anything did happen, we would all be comfortable with each other, and we would be able to respond in a calm and professional manner, where we're not just trying to meet each other during that time. We've been working with the Vermont School Safety Center for about 18 months. Vermont has done a really nice job of making available to all schools, free of charge, a service exactly like Lieutenant French talked about coming into the school. We did that at the beginning of this year in all of our schools, and then we build our plans based on what we find from that, and then we build our investments of what we want to do to make sure that we are following those plans, whether it's training with our staff, whether it's improvements that we want to do to the physical plan. Vermont has done a really nice job of encouraging that communication across the whole platform, so that we can just make it part of our routine business. It's a continuous thing. We're never going to get there, but we always have to keep improving.
Okay, Mr. Anton, I have a couple gun-specific questions that have come in here. The first is, what system is in place to prevent a gun from entering the school?
I think I'll turn that over to Principal Perrin to talk about what's in place.
So, I think Bob may have a very similar answer. We've talked about how do we prevent guns from coming into the school. We've talked about how do we ensure student safety. You know, we have opted not to have metal detectors. We've opted to not, some schools do clear backpacks. We've opted not to do that. What we rely on right now is we rely on our teachers, we rely on our students, and it's pretty common that if a student, and to be honest, a knife is a more common thing to see in school. 9 times out of 10, that knife is in a student's backpack inadvertently. They were hunting, they were working someplace, they may use a program here at the school, and so it's an honest mistake. And so the way that usually plays out for us is a student will come to me or come to another administrator and say, I think I see this in a student's backpack or something of that nature, or I saw this when they open up their backpack, and then we'll work with that student. We'll isolate that student. We'll have them come down to our offices with their backpack. We'll 9 times out of 10 we say, we hear that this is going on right now. Is it true? And usually the student says yes, and they give us whatever that weapon is, and we go from there. We have a pretty specific board policy that requires a board hearing when that happens. That board policy also has contingencies for it not to go to a school board hearing. We follow those as well. I don't know, Bob, do you have anything?
Yeah, I guess, as far as we use a similar system here, but in the systems, folks think maybe we don't search guests when they come in. So there's a lot of trust built into who's coming in, but we're expecting them to sign when they come into the building. The part that's the challenge, I think, of course, it's fairly obvious that every day the doors are unlocked for a period of time when the buses arrive. And all the students come in and we let them right in. Because we're a school, we have to. And I think the part that's hard for us as school officials is there's a lot of elements that are put under our domain, education being one of them, but it's often not the primary one, unfortunately. When we think about the idea that a school is as safe as the students, and the teachers, and the people who are there, the community want it to be. So we have set doors, our buildings, your building, we have a lot of doors too. Our building's unusually laid out hill. And so there's lots of doors and levels. And one of the biggest challenges we have is students letting in other people inside doors. They're not coming through the front door, they're being led through a side door. Typically, there are people that the student knows, and typically there are other students sneaking out or sneaking back for lunch or some such thing. But I think, the reality for a lot of our students, and I think Gary talked a little bit about it, was, the environment has shifted, and when students are feeling scared to be in a building, that's not a great feeling. And so for us, how do we not only make them feel safe, but actually make them safe? It's really pretty complex, and so it's really based on how strong that community is to come together and say, I'm not going to open the door. Go around, go to the front office and check in the way you're supposed to. And that's tough. And we're lucky in the sense that we're a very small school, under 300 kids, so it's a little bit tighter maybe in the community. I can't imagine thinking about it at a building size with BAMs and high school. But it's really the same premise. You want to have a sense of community. You want kids to feel like they belong. You want them to feel like they're part of something positive. And that is how you prevent violence in schools. That's really the primary way.
Okay. Listen, this is another one for the school administrators. This is a little more hot button, so we're going to stay cool. This is kind of getting at the concept possibly of having personnel armed inside or outside the school. This questioner asks, is it an allowed option for school personnel to conceal carry, or is it presently illegal? Can staff be armed legally? I don't know.
No, my understanding is the only person in our building that is armed is our school resource officer and any police officers that come to visit.
Okay.
To also talk about that, it's a political situation, but I would really hate to see the day where we have teachers carrying guns. It's not part of my philosophy of education. I would really have to work strongly against that.
There are people out there who do wonder, if it's a good idea. It's been promoted in some circles. I guess if it ever came to it, what would that picture realistically look like? There would have to be liability questions, I imagine. There would have to be training. Hypothetically, what would it take? I don't know if anyone knows.
I think people would
Like I said,
I think people would leave the profession.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would leave the profession. It's not what they went in for.
Another law question, and this is one that actually came up when I was a high school student some years ago in the Berkshires, where there's also a lot of hunting. What's the current law about guns in a student's vehicle in the school parking lot?
So schools are designated as gun-free zones by federal law.
Mm-hmm.
So that includes parking lots.
That change was made when I was a high school student because there were lots of kids who wanted to go hunting. And there were suspensions. And then there were challenges to those suspensions. Another question, we have a great restorative justice program here at BUHS. What are ways we can utilize that resource to help students without criminalizing students? That's for you, Mr. Perrin.
Sure, we do that all the time, and Mike Sostak, who I think is here tonight, does a fantastic job of working with students, with parents, and he brings in other community members as we need to. It's funny, we were doing interviews today. A candidate for a position here asked about our restorative justice program, so we just talked about this. In terms of criminalizing or not criminalizing, that's really not our call. That's really a call of law enforcement. And I know that when we have a situation that could be a criminal charge, I know that our SRO, the Leland County Sheriff, works directly with the state's attorney. They talk about that. That decision isn't really our decision, whether or not it becomes a criminal investigation. What we do is we work with that student. And a lot of times, our philosophy has been for many years that we don't want to exclude students from school. We don't want to suspend a student for 10 days and say, we'll see you later on, and then they come back and they do something, we suspend it for another 10 days. That's a cycle that leads to students dropping out and even worse things happening when they're young adults. So what we try to do, working with our restorative program, is we try to create a scenario where a student can sit down, not with adults, but with peers. And we have a peer mediation panel that does a fantastic job.
And they'll sit down with Mr. Sostak, they'll sit down with an administrator, a teacher, they're involved, and there's a conversation with that student about what they have done and how does it affect the school community. Not what they've done wrong, but what they've done, and how does that behavior affect other people. And the students on the panel actually will speak to that, and they'll say, let me take an example of maybe a student was in a fight or something. They'll say to that student, when that happened, I felt really unsafe because this is the cascade effect it had on me. You know, we had one where we actually had to remove people from a classroom. And the student said, I was really upset because you really interfered with my education. And so when we have those mediations, I would say the vast majority of the time, that student kind of acknowledges what they did. And we move on. We welcome that student back into the community. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll have it could be a long period of suspension. We'll actually, I don't say bargain, we'll say we want to reduce the period of suspension if you are willing to enter into this process. There's other times where that process leads to a more sustained circle of support for the student, where we bring in people from the community who can talk to that student about finding support, how can they make changes in their life that things are under their control. So, that variegation program has been a boon to us, and I would, recommend any school thinking about that process come and talk to us. It's been a great program.
Okay, lots of questions for the school administrators here.
I'm going to just talk a little bit
more
about restorative justice, because we actually have some people in the room in addition to Mike Sostak, who have done some training with counselors in our schools, so that it's not just a program that's here in place in BU number 6, but that counselors and social workers in other schools, in the elementary schools, also feeling more comfortable about setting up restorative justice circles. Because one of the things that we really have worked hard on in the elementary schools is helping students know and find the words. If they're angry, here are the words that I need to use. And here's the person that I can go and talk to. If I'm scared, the same thing. So we started very young thinking about restorative justice and restorative practices with all of our children.
Anyone else on that question? Lots of work coming in. So this might be able to bring it over to the back or the left side of the table. I don't know. How can these organizations come together to help support families, communities raising kids, and how do families feel and see this happening? So I guess this is more of sort of multi-dimensional approach. Let's come back. This one's more specific. This one's more specific. Many of the school shooters have been bullied. Do you have programs? Have your programs reduced bullying in your schools? This would be again for the administrator side of the building. And I guess how would you determine that?
Right, and that's the question. How do you determine that? Well, what we do is we track every year how many cases of harassment. Harassment and bullying is a very specific legal thing in Vermont. And so we track every year, how many students are harassed based on race, how many are harassed based on sexual orientation, how many students are bullied. And I've been the principal here for 7 years, and I was a teacher before that, and assistant principal before that. And I can tell you that our students have made great strides over the years. They're much nicer to each other most of the time. And we've seen a significant drop in those harassment and bullying cases until a few years ago, when now it's Finsta and Instagram and social media has really created a challenge. And that's something that we always wrestle with, because it's really easy to bully somebody when you're not looking at them. It's really easy to kind of send out that group text or that group chat and just kind of rip somebody apart. And they're, in some cases, they're literally sitting in the same room. And the person is texting a whole group. And the person in the same room is the object of that. So I think in terms of bullying, you know, I think as a community, we recognize it and we know it's, you know, wrong. But when we get caught up in that electronic device, we forget that we're really talking to somebody. We forget that it's a person with feelings and with emotion at the other end of that screen who's, you know, when you're calling them that horrible name and you're like, ha ha, LOL, you're reading that and you're like, that's not so funny, WTF. So, sorry, I'm trying to speak like that. So I really think that's an important thing to think about is how do we address the electronic piece.
The other thing that we have in place in all of our schools are leadership teams. And we look at student climate surveys with those leadership teams. And part of that work is helping students learn what does it mean to be a bystander? What does it mean to be an active bystander? How do we help other peers that we see that are struggling, that are having difficulties, that may need someone to come to their defense? We've set up buddy benches at playgrounds so if a student is feeling like they're being left out and they need a friend and they're feeling insecure, they can go to the buddy bench. And when students see that there are people on the buddy bench, they come and say, can you come and play this game with me now? So Diana Wally's here, she's led this this project for us for many years now, and we see our students knowing what it means to be a bystander and to be an active bystander and how they can help their friends.
The one element I'll add to that is, seems exactly right as he describes the social media element. The legislation in Vermont includes behavior that happens outside the school day on social media that we have to deal with if that has an impact on the child's access to school, which of course, as soon as there's a conversation spills into a Monday morning weekend, it obviously impacts school. So we end up policing a lot of these social media interactions that aren't just in the same room, but that happen on Saturday nights from 15 miles away. So it makes our lives incredibly complicated.
Do you want to talk about this out here in terms of like law enforcement or medicine, in terms of bullying and its impact on kids? Is there any, I've left you guys alone for a while. Get you back in policy.
From a law enforcement perspective, specifically related to schools, I would offer my kudos to the school, administrators, because they do a phenomenal job of dealing with what's a huge, huge issue. It's relatively rare for us to get involved in situations like that. The vast majority of the time, the school handles it and they handle it pretty effectively. And I would agree with some of the things that I don't remember Steve Lyle said earlier, related to community justice programs and the peer programs and so on. Much more effective than a cop walking in, throwing handcuffs on a kid, dragging them to the police station, call them on their dad, they come down, and that's the end of their consequence. That doesn't do anything. So relatively limited involvement from a police perspective. If there are threats of violence or something that the school feels we need to be involved in, they contact us or I have to go through the school resource. I don't know if it's different in outlying communities or not. No, it's the same.
At the offices, we try to address it at a pretty young age. It's amazing the age now that kids are on iPads and phones, and we try to impress this on the older kids, the 11, 12, 13-year-olds. What happens and the consequences of social media. You can't take that back once you send it through the airways. And something that they think that they're just sending to a friend can end up going on the World Wide Web. And people still say that. But yeah, we do address it. We do see it as an issue, and we hope we can make an impact on it.
Okay, I have another freshman here. This might be more for the law enforcement and medical side, but it might be an education question too. Can anyone comment on the connection between masculinity and school shootings? I would probably expand that to be in other violent acts. Because we had a school shooting here. Question points out that it's been mostly males who have perpetrated these crimes. Mr. Josephson?
Yeah, I don't have the answer, but obviously the statistics are what they are. There's preponderance of male perpetrators of these acts, and I really turn to fellow members of the community what it is about the way we socialize men and young men in this society and our communities versus women, and the isolation that some young men certainly fall into these things. So, again, I bet the school is certainly aware of this and looks to what the school community can do to support young men. But I think it goes back to sort of some of the soft things. You've talked about bullying, which is more overt, but I've seen in my practice certainly that there's a lot of microaggressions that happen all the time. And what I mean by that is, in the old days, if you had a birthday party for your daughter and she invited her circle of friends and they had a good time, maybe someone around the lunch table would say, that was a fun birthday party last night. But now everyone sees the pictures online on their Facebook page, and everyone knows I wasn't invited to that party, and that hurts a lot, and that can build up a lot of hurt and resentment for young people.
I went through that with my daughter when she was 5. Anyone else want to tackle that one? Anything more to add on? Okay, this is another school administrator question for 2 principals. With regards to requesting or asking students to report if they know of a potential threat, have you received any reports on that? And if so, what's being done? Have you received any threats in Parkland, and what's come of it? I guess is the question.
I did, when after Perrin happened, in the next couple of weeks after that, accepting snow days, we took the opportunity to meet with all students. And, it was by class, so it wasn't exactly an intimate setting, it was 200 students at a time. One of the themes that I kind of sounded with the students was that, they have a long history already of taking care of each other. They have a long history. They see a classmate, who's struggling, and, more often it's a student who's thinking about taking their own life. Our students are phenomenal at stepping forward and saying, I'm worried about this person, this is why, and we get appropriate support for that person. And so I kind of try to draw the analogy that this is similar. If we see something that we need to step up, we need to kind of let somebody else know that, I have a friend or a classmate who's hurting. And we certainly haven't had anything to the level of Fairhaven at BUHS. But we've had people express concerns about their peers, and we followed up on that as with that student, with the family. One of the unintended negative consequences is, a student will come in and they'll be earnestly concerned, and I'll ask them why, and they'll say, well, they're just weird. And that's a tough conversation to have with a student who doesn't feel safe, but they can't verbalize it, and a lot of times that's that teenage ability to recognize somebody who's non-conforming and to try to kind of make something out of that. And I'm not saying you're a bad person for coming forward, but that's an educational moment, to say, well, what is it that you say is weird, and we kind of have a conversation.
Okay, let's jump off and see somebody say something to the law enforcement folks who are here. You guys talk a little bit about, you were taking care of it. You talk a little bit about that, sort of what the typical process is when someone takes you off and makes a complaint or says, my friend is really kind of acting bizarre lately, there's saying things that are really concerning me. Sort of, where is from the minute it comes in, how does that process work? And how can people be more helpful to you in terms of being able to prevent trafficking before it happens?
Yes. More recently, we have seen more calls coming in, and it's great. With the call, it's very important that students are comfortable in approaching law enforcement, and just know that there is an issue, and maybe it's something, maybe it's nothing. I'd rather have somebody call us and have it turn out to be nothing than no one calls at all, because we can have that conversation or start those conversations with the person, the family, and possibly get mental health people involved if necessary, and have something bad happen. So if somebody calls and makes a complaint, and the trooper's assigned to the call, they will do a little research, try to find out why the complaint was made, what is concerning that happened. After that, excuse me, we would reach out to the parents of that person and try to figure out what's going on and why the complaint's happening and what we can do to help that person. So it's not, we've had several in the past couple weeks that have kind of fizzled out to be nothing, but at least we've documented that. We've had our mental health clinician in-house help out and kind of bridge that gap with mental health and those other programs in place that maybe can help somebody steer them in the right direction, making sure we're keeping schools apprised of the process of what's going on, so everybody's involved and moving forward.
Anything to add to that, Captain, from the Brattleboro perspective?
No, our process is pretty much exactly the same. You know, a report would come in, kind of starts two balls rolling. I guess the first one is to deal with the potential exigency of the situation. So an officer's going to go make contact with that person. You know, in this case, the trooper's going to go contact that person and make sure they're not doing anything right now. They're not going to do something right now. And then we start sort of surrounding them with the things that are probably lacking in them, like we get in touch with their parents, the school. Some of the safeties we have an in-house social worker from HCRS as well. She is able to bridge a lot of those gaps and just try to find out what is going on with that person that might have caused this. In some circumstances, it's a misunderstanding by the person who made the report. Saw a photo online didn't really like, saw a comment on Facebook didn't really like, and called the police. And that's fine. No one gets in any trouble, no one has any problems, no one has a record. So, like the lieutenant said, we'd much rather get a call and have it turn out to be nothing than not get a call and have it turn out to be something.
Okay. This is more of an opening question. We're hearing a lot of thoughtful and rigorous prevention measures that schools and law enforcement are taking. Is anyone going to speak to what they wish other sectors could do to protect our children? In terms of people, I mean, asking them to sort of speak for people around the room, I don't know if anyone wants to take swing at that. Yeah.
No, I don't think okay, sure.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious. I'm curious about the panel itself. We don't seem to have an ECRS representative at the table. I'm wondering if that was just an omission by the people sitting at the panel, whether they weren't able to provide someone to be here. I think that's a giant omission here. I think they're the designated state mental health agency, and they should be at this table as well. I'm curious, listening to these guys talk about the clinicians they have at their department level. Schools can also get ECRS clinicians if we pay ECRS for it. I don't know if the police have to pay for that service or that's provided to them, but it'd be really great if through the state budgeting of mental health that they could provide that resource to schools at the expense of the health and human services rather than having it be funded through the school budget item. So that's just my 2 cents.
I agree that's a mission on our part. If we continue this conversation, perhaps we'll have some concerns here. Okay, let me just go through the questions real quick. Please hold. A lot of these. So, is there a difference if those arts are anonymous, by the way, Senator French? And does that change the way you're able to handle that? Or, because sometimes people don't want their name to be attached to something that they're saying about a friend. I mean, it's Vermont, it's a tight-knit community, and people might not want to have it trace back to them that they said, something potentially derogatory about so-and-so.
Yeah, of course. It is different because we can't go directly to the source and get an understanding as to why somebody made that concerning call to us. So it does help, it is helpful if somebody, you know, if we can actually speak directly with the person that saw the comment or heard the comment, so we can put it in perspective a little bit better. But if it was an anonymous comment or an anonymous report that we received of a Facebook post or something like that, we would still follow up the same way.
Okay, let's go back to the educator side of the table, if we will. Fresh question here. Do you feel there's a place to update educational curriculum and teacher training in the light of growing familial, societal, and other pressures on our young? So I guess the question is, you know, is there room to update more of what we're doing with regards to the curriculum and teacher training to help deal with the problems that the kids come to school with?
So the first thing that comes to mind is that we do professional development around trauma-informed and ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, thank you. So that is professional development. That is, I don't know if it's happening at the college level or not, but helping our teachers understand what students are coming with and some of the triggers that might set them off when they get into the classroom. So that's been important professional development. Interestingly, a kindergarten teacher, I think, met with Captain Carignan recently to really talk about, so can we work together to create a curriculum so that we know how to talk to 5-year-olds about school safety so that they feel safe and not alarmed, but know what to do. When I say you do this, you must do this. So yes, there are updated curriculums. Most schools, at least in Wyndham Southeast, and I suspect also in Wyndham Central, have programs in place where there's a morning meeting, a responsive classroom, developmental designs, advisory, so that our students have small groups for, at least in the high school, the same person for 4 years, where they can start to talk about things that may be bothering them and have a way to have a voice.
Yeah, I would echo what Lyle is saying. We are investing heavily in resources and time to develop the capacity of all adults in our system to create a supportive community. Students are coming to our schools very different than they did 20 years ago. And so we need to update all the skills of the adults that are the first contact with all of these students. We are developing a counseling group that is throughout our entire supervisory union to kind of have a core group of people that will be able to connect with all of our adults. We're using a lot of our professional development money. We are actually right now negotiating a 3 to 4 year partnership of how that's going to work, because you can't just do one-time shot. It's really got to be the development of the professionals in the building and have the most contact with the students so that they can be prepared to develop a culture that develops that relationship, so students talk to them, so that they understand, as Lyle was saying, the triggers, how do you use the words, and this is something teachers are really asking for. They absolutely are recognizing the challenges that students come to school with, and they want to develop those professional capacities.
Okay, another educator question. It gets back to something that we started with here with regards to student activism and response to Parkland. Kids who seen Parkland, who've seen what the Parkland kids are doing. There's kids getting involved in local high schools who want to sort of be part of that, but it's not a unanimous picture. We had some students gather outside this high school today to assert some their support of Second Amendment rights. What's that juggling at like in terms of being able to support everybody? Because suddenly we've got, here we go, we've got kids who have had this sort of political process that's been going on in state houses and in Washington, and now it's suddenly in the high school halls. What does that look like, and how do you juggle that balance?
Okay, really quickly, while I was organizing the walkout, I made the mistake, but also Probably a good decision to create a Facebook group chat, and I just added everybody, and I had them add everybody of their friends, and so through that group chat, we kind of separated into another one about debating like gun control laws and issues called like firearms debate. And so those students have been really respectful of our opinions, the like more liberal-sided people, and vice versa, we've been really respectful of their opinions. So that's what the students, like, students on students kind of, the relationships that are happening, we're really respectful of each other. We're also really respectful of our First Amendment rights, and so today wasn't really much of a big deal to us, or at least to me. I was respectful that they also had a voice and they shared their opinions as well as we shared ours. So that's what's going on between student relations studies.
So at our school, we had the march out and we also had people protesting and wearing camouflage. Those who were part of the march were going to wear orange. I wore either because I stood for both and didn't want to be targeted. I thought it was funny, but it was scary. So not only did the people exercising the First Amendment for the Second Amendment put up posters and were camouflage that day, the people wearing orange did the same thing. I did hear about some confrontations that had to be broken up between the camo and the orange. But other than that, it was pretty respectful. Besides like a few incidents we had. But there was supposed to be a protest, 2-hour protest from the camo people that never showed up, which I thought was a little ironic. Yeah.
And just to clarify Gary's point, the instance they referred to, there was a few of us that witnessed Gary's one walking around the school with student camo, looking at the signs they hung up, having a really respectful conversation. So that goes some of what happened rather than there were a lot of really appropriate conversations as well. We ended up, as these guys have mentioned, the restorative process before. We're working on right now putting together a group, restorative circle group between those two groups to get them to come together and talk, because we do want to make sure that we have a strong community. I want to make sure that the work of the protest group did not divide the school further, is why my message to them was that it makes us less safe.
Okay. I think we're at a point where we've been at this for an hour and a quarter. So I wondered if you guys had statements you wanted to make. We've got an opportunity for those of you in the audience. Okay. Yeah, I actually have a wrap-up question. Let's do it that way. To all the panelists in turn, now, give up the microphone. What have you heard tonight that you will take away moving forward towards solutions on these issues? And also the microphones will be starting.
I think what I've heard tonight is the value of bringing some mental health experts into our regular routine meetings that we have about school safety, that we can extend that conversation into really thinking about the mental health of our students in a preventative manner so that we can understand what's going on. Having two high-level doctors on the panel giving some feedback is illuminating for me and makes me kind of curious about getting some deeper information from all of my colleagues.
I think for me, the complexities of this challenge that we all face, we want our schools to be safe for kids, and guns are part of that, mental health is part of that, safety, emotional safety in schools is part of that, physical safety around structures to have schools buzzer doors and those kinds of measures are part of that. Police response is part of that. And there's so many levels to this. The mail question that was brought up earlier, there's a lot of really good questions that come out of that. It makes, the thing for me that I'm taking away from that is, what can we do better as a school to work with young boys and as they develop into young adolescents to make sure that they are really receiving a different kind of thing than what they're receiving right now.
One of the things that I come away with is that everybody in this room, everybody everywhere can agree on school safety. We want our schools to be safe. And that needs to be separate from the conversation around Second Amendment and being able to own a gun. One of the things that I've just heard from Bob is, I love the idea of a restorative circle to just bring those two groups of people together, to have some respectful conversations and learn how to be able to talk to each other and express opinions, differing opinions, in respectful ways.
So I guess, for me, it highlights once again how complex the issue is. And, you know, we're up here as law enforcement, we're up here as medical professionals, as educators. But this panel should include more students, it should include parents, it should include other agencies. I think because, it's going to sound callous and I don't mean it to, because school shootings happen in schools, we lose sight of the fact that it's not a school shooting issue. It's an issue in general. It's an issue on how we treat each other. It's an issue on how we respect each other. From age 13 to 99. So I think, for me, that's, I guess I want to recommit our work and what we do here to that, to remembering that this is not limited to us in this room or us in a school building. It's really a larger issue. And we all have to take care of our kids. And if one little piece of good news came out of this, our students have a voice, and it is an incredible voice, and we should start to listen.
I have to say, I'm just so encouraged by hearing the community partners and how educators are responding so thoughtfully, and for a while now, this is not a knee-jerk response. They're really involved with law enforcement and education, and so that's wonderful. It is a complicated issue. I would say, and I think you've heard this from the panel, resources matter. And so I can tell you that at the retreat, we treat some of these youth and adults who we're scared of in the community. And invariably, if you got to know them in a safe place like the retreat, you'd say, these are scared people. These are people who are struggling in their lives and don't have the way to figure out how to express themselves. And they're good people. They're our neighbors. They're people in our classrooms. They're really no different from us. They just maybe had a lot harder lives. And so for me, from the mental health perspective, I'd say resources matter. And if we can get in there and do more prevention, and not just be responding to crises when things are already broken, that's a much better way to go. So as much as we can do to support mental health, and it doesn't have to be at the retreat or even with HCRS, it can be in the schools, it can be in other aspects of the community, but so long as we have those resources, I think we're going to be stronger and the kids will be better off. Thank you.
All right, for law enforcement, as far as my perspective, the best thing we can do is to be more involved in the community. Our community outreach, to be involved in the schools. As far as education, so they understand what we're doing, we're working together with them. We're involved in forums like this where we're outreach, that we have the outreach to the community, so I can understand what you're thinking. You can hear me speak and understand what the police are thinking, and the students as well. So we all need to come together and understand the different perspectives that everyone is coming from for a multifaceted approach.
The biggest point that I'm taking away from this is really one of encouragement that this conversation is happening, if not led by kids, certainly motivated by kids. In the past, it seems whenever conversations about school shootings occur, it's adults just sort of coming up with policy solutions without necessarily having much of an eye towards the problem they're trying to solve. So someone will say, ban assault rifles, and folks that are against any gun control will say no, and that's the end of the conversation. And then someone will say arm school teachers, and the teachers' unions and administrators and some other folks will say no, and that's the end of the conversation. No one's ever actually thinking, what are we trying to do here? Lieutenant French and I, if I can be so bold as to speak on your behalf, are fortunate enough to have jobs where we can kind of rise above that bumper sticker policy formation stuff. Our job is to just try to have fewer people get killed. And I think the kids, similarly, are saying, look, we don't necessarily know what you grown-ups are doing with the laws and the policies. We just don't want to die in school. So maybe there's a conversation about gun control. Maybe there's a conversation about mental health. Maybe there's something the cops can do. But the fact that they're sort of looking at the problem. Kids are getting shot in schools, and we want that to happen less, and reverse engineering a solution from there, as opposed to just throwing out sort of political policy ideas and hoping something sticks to the wall, is incredibly encouraging to me, both as a police officer, as a father, as a dad of kids that go to public schools in Brattleboro. And if that, professionally speaking, that's more personal. Professionally speaking, if that leads to more tools for police officers to help in that process, to help people get the help they need, to temporarily restrict their access to firearms where they get help that they may need, that's a good thing. So I'm very encouraged by the type of conversations that are happening now. Seem a little bit different than the type of conversations that have happened in the past. Again, I credit the kids across the country for motivating us to get over butts and talk about this.
Well, I'd like to say, first of all, I am not a doctor, although I did spend a Holiday Express last night. But my encouragement of this whole thing is how the communities have been getting involved, and I think that's very important. The professionals can only do so much. We need to have the passion from the community, the eyes and ears from the community, and actually the advice and which direction to head from the community. And it starts at a very young age. I was asked at the beginning, are we seeing kids with more anxiety now and stuff like that? We are, but it's the younger kids we're seeing with more anxiety. They're hearing about this news, and they're hearing about stuff happening. And it's the 7, 8, 9-year-olds that are kind of scared. And I think we got to remember that, and we have to start at that age and kind of direct them and help them and guide them. And I think everybody up here, and this is, everybody in the community is really working hard for that goal. And it's going to happen.
Thank you. I want to close this by offering 2 humongous thank yous. First, I want to thank each and every one of you in the audience for asking fantastic questions, for showing the kind of courtesy and respect that I dreamed we would be able to get out of this. We didn't get to every hot button issue. We didn't, but I think it's a start, and I think you're to be commended for that. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank each and every one of our panelists for their thoughtful answers to these questions, and for their honesty, their candor, for taking time out of Friday night to be here to talk about a fairly tough set of issues. I'd also like to thank our high school students for having. And with that, thank you. We should, there were folks on the panel that we'd like to include, and maybe I thought we should, I've been thinking all day we shouldn't do this, maybe we should do another one, who knows? So maybe that'll happen, we'll see. But anyway, thank you all very much, each and every one of you. If you guys want to stick around and talk to some folks about you one-on-one.